Today I'll be talking about the historiography of the Declaration of Independence and the multiple meanings that have been connected to this document. This is one of the most important documents in history. It's a document that is going to change the world in many different ways. One of the most quoted lines is, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." And that, even right there at the beginning, AP can be controversial. Former Governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, argued that it's impossible to show what a whole people believe and that they are justified in rising up because the colonies themselves at this time were not unified. There were so many disagreements among the colonies as a whole, and truly it was speaking for more of an upper class, a wealthy class. Additionally, it leaves out many groups of people, most notably the African Americans, with the institution of slavery being present in the southern states. Hutchinson also was quoted as questioning how they could justify depriving of more than 100,000 Africans of their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if you're quoting that, it should be applicable to all, and it does not work if you're leaving out this large group of people. It can be further analyzed in modern times as well. In 1987, Thurgood Marshall questioned the validity of the entire document because it left out African Americans. It's a document full of irony, right? It says one thing, but the reality of society at this time is completely different. And supporting the institution of slavery is going to go against what the Declaration stood for. Incorporating all the races is going to be an issue that is going to be questioned throughout history. And what does equal mean? What does equality mean? It was in degrees. We've talked about and studied in many classes Abraham Lincoln. And one of his most famous quotes that he did not intend to declare that all men are equal in all respects. They did not mean to say they were equal in size, color, intellect, moral development, or social capacity. Saying that they should not be given political and social equality, but just the equality of opportunity, right? Being allowed to have their natural freedoms that are granted to them by being humans, creating that equality of opportunity, not equality of race. Another important thing is argued by David Armitage is that the Declaration of Independence was not talking about individual rights. It was talking about states' rights. And that could throw a new meaning on the Declaration of Independence. He is quoted as saying, "Is the incomplete development that gives the rights to the equality of rights that have preoccupied us through all of history, and that these statements apply to the rights of an individual state." In this case, we're referencing the colonies and not individuals themselves. That is important because independence movements such as Taiwan, Kosovo, etc. have used the same terminology in the Declaration of Independence, and they're using it in reference to the independence and freedom for their country, right? Their birth announcements, as opposed to using them as a frame of reference for rights of their citizens. Some historians have argued the Declaration is not talking about equality for all races at all, and that it's still sticking back to those states' rights. Additionally, there is much criticism of Jefferson and his ideas not being new or profound, but essentially plagiarism, right? Recycled ideas. The Declaration was not new. In the words of historian Stephen Lucas, it's on the tradition of declarations as a genre of political discourse. So it was just a frame of reference in how the British protested things. It was part of the culture as British colonies that was how they went about protesting certain policies It did not actually mean real independence. There's also the similarity that of charges against George III versus James II. They both called out the monarchs for passing laws without the consent of Parliament, quartering, and other things such as that. So there's not like these new things. They're just taking old charges from previous kings and using them again, the ones that applied. George Willis argued that the Declaration of Independence lined up with the Scottish common sense principles, right? Focused on the common sense of citizens themselves and not on these new ideas or principles, right? There are many reflections of Locke, Rousseau, the Mayflower Compact, etc. in Jefferson's writings. And Mike Zuckert went on to point out, if these truths were self-evident, if it's so clear and obvious that people are supposed to have these rights, then, quote, why have so many political societies, both before and after the revolution, failed to recognize them, end quote. Saying that, if it's so easy to point out these rights that everyone should have, then there should be revolutions anytime these rights were violated. And that was not the case. It's much more complex than that. Many people argue that the Declaration of Independence is obsolete now. It's over 200 years old. It does not apply to concepts or controversies or issues in the modern world. Woodrow Wilson was quoted as saying, the Declaration of Independence did not mention the questions of our day. It has no consequences to us. So intimately involved in the circumstances of the day in which it was conceived and written, stating that the Declaration of Independence applied in the 18th century, but not to the modern world. So it's outdated, and it does not apply. There are not many monarchs left in the modern world, so many of the principles are outdated. The Declaration of Independence is going to be the basis for many other civil rights movements. The women's rights movement. They wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women at the Seneca Falls Convention. Taking the words saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. Basis for the civil rights movement in the 60s as well. And using this as a model, trying to interpret the meaning of the founders. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan took the meaning of the Declaration of Independence even further, declaring that it to be the basis for outlawing abortion. The inalienable rights that everyone is entitled to was the right to life itself, as he said. It doesn't matter if you're too young or old, sick or handicapped, every person has the right to life, and the freedom's guaranteed with that. When the founders wrote the Declaration of Independence, they were not referencing abortion, but the modern interpretations on it have been able to use those words to apply them to abortion laws. So it is one of the most used and interpreted documents in history, used for revolutions, governments, etc. And the true meaning of it is timeless, and it will always be open to interpretation.